Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Backrack, and I'm part of Northampton Neighbors, and I'm part of the Speakers Committee. And it's my pleasure to welcome everybody here today. Northampton Neighbors is over 1,300 people now. Our members can be any age from newborn on up, but you have to be disabled or over 55 to receive a service. Our goal is helping all of us as we get older, age in place. We're unique because there's no fee for the membership or for any cost of our services. So hopefully we give a good service, and Northampton appears to really appreciate it. So it's very nice. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Maria Rivera. She's the executive director of the hospice of the Fisher Home. Maria graduated from Greenfield Community College, went on to get her RN from Elms College. She was the clinical director of the Fisher Home for almost 8 years. And then for the past 3 years, she's been the executive director. And as she says, her passion is hospice. So let's hear more from Maria. Thank you, Maria. Take it away.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for the opportunity of being here with you all today. I like to begin with a little history of hospice, how it all began and how it came to be in the United States. Hospice starts with a woman named Dame Cicely Saunders, who was a doctor in England in the late 1950s. Well, you have to understand that until the late 1950s, it was common practice that doctors continued to treat patients and treat patients and treat patients until almost their dying day. And in fact, it was widely considered a failure of a doctor if they decided to stop treating a patient or if the patient was to die. So Dame Cicely Saunders was the first person to link symptom management to compassionate care. So she insisted that dying people needed dignity and compassion and respect and support. And so she started the first modern hospice, St. Christopher's, in 1967 in Southwest London. So she started practicing this compassionate care that she believed in. And at the same time, there was a woman named Florence Wald, who was the dean of nursing at the Yale School of Nursing. And she heard about the good work that Dr. Saunders was doing in England. And so she said to her husband, honey, I want to go on sabbatical, and I want to go and learn with Dr. Saunders. And so they scooped up their whole family and they went to Southwest London, and Florence Wald started learning with Dr. Saunders. So now that was in 1968. In 1969, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book called On Death and Dying, and it became an international bestseller. People were starting to talk about it now. You know, death should not be institutionalized was her number one belief. And her second biggest belief was that patients should be able to participate in their own plan of care. So now this was a movement that was starting to happen. People were talking about death and dying, and people were realizing that having this compassionate care model at the end of life was beneficial to the patients and the families. So in 1974, Florence Wald, who had now returned to the United States, her, along with 2 pediatricians and a chaplain, started the first hospice in the United States. It was called the Connecticut Hospice, and it was in Branford, Connecticut. So you can imagine, at this point, the Medicare hospice benefit didn't exist. It didn't exist until 1982. So these people were finding a way to give this kind of care and creating this themselves and trying to make the hospice model work. So in about the year 2000, a local woman named Barbara Snook was inspired by the idea of having a hospice residence in the Amherst area. There is no other hospice residence in Western Massachusetts, and she knew that it was something that the community really needed. And so what she did was reach out to a woman named Joan Kachakian, who had started Hospice of Hampshire County 20 years ago in 1978. So she got in touch with her and they started planning, trying to figure out a way to bring hospice to Western Massachusetts to bring a hospice residents to Western Massachusetts. So with two happy miracles, the hospice of the Fisher home was born. So the first one was that Barbara Snook had a husband, Dietrich, who was a professor, and one of his students called him up one day and said, do you know that the government is giving away $8 million to worthy causes in the state? And, I think that you should apply because your wife is trying to start this hospice. And so as the story goes, it gets embellished over time, I'm sure, but as the story goes, they were driving the last day that it was, the applications were due in the snow and inclement weather, and they got there and they got their application in. And a little while later, they heard that they had actually been awarded $1 million from the state. The other miracle is that there was a place called the Amherst Home for Aged Women. And it was a place where women would pool their resources together and live so that they could have, enough resources to have the help that they needed. So the Amherst Home for Aged Women donated what was left of their funds and their home to Friends of Hospice House, Inc. In other words, the hospice of the Fisher home opened its doors in 2006. So let's see, in 2006, I was just beginning my career in healthcare. My grandmother was a nurse, and so she gave me the love for caregiving at a very early age. She had me in nursing homes and nursing facilities with my little tutus and outfits on, doing dances and singing songs. And I got to know what it was like to experience other people's joy, the joy that would come across the faces of the patients and the happiness that it would bring them. And I decided that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be a nurse. So I became a nurse, and I finally got out there into the real world and started doing nursing for real. And honestly, I didn't find too many opportunities to bring joy. I could probably tell you stories, but I am going to tell you the stories, but not about that. I think I'll tell you some stories about some things I've seen since I started my hospice career. So I think first I'll tell you about a patient named Brian. He had a particularly difficult life, and at some point he had become involved with drugs and alcohol and had some crime on his record, and he just had a rough run of it. And he came into the Fisher home with an arterial occlusion in his leg. So basically what that means is that it's like putting a tourniquet on the top of your leg and no blood can get down to the rest of it. So it's a very painful experience to have. It's like letting your leg be, when something falls asleep, letting it stay that way, So he came here, and as his days went by, he was getting to be in more and more pain, and he was refusing to take any pain medication. And this is the right of a hospice patient. They don't have to take medicine. It's up to them. So Brian was getting into more and more pain, and it was distressing for the staff and distressing for his wife, who at that point decided that she wasn't going to come in anymore because she couldn't see him like that anymore. So she had stopped coming. And as much as the nurses tried to explain that, it doesn't mean anything if he takes pain medication, he just refused to take it. So hospice is an interdisciplinary group. So we got together as a team with the psychosocial team and the nurses and the CNAs and the doctor. And we said, what we're trying to figure out what's going on with this gentleman. And it turns out that the spiritual counselor said, I think something's going on, that I should go and speak to him. So she went into his room and she was talking to him about how he was feeling and what was going on. And he told her that he deserves to suffer in his death because of the things that he had done in his life. He was convinced that this was his payment for the way that he had lived his life. And when the spiritual counselor heard that, she just sat and she held space for him, and she asked him, tell me about the things, tell me why you think that. And he unleashed all of the things that he'd been carrying within himself for such a long time. And she just sat there and held space for him. And she looked at him at the end and she said, I could hear in your voice how guilty you felt and how much you regret those things and the pain that you've carried around with you, that you've endured throughout your life. And she said, Brian, your debt is paid in full. And when he heard those words, he started crying, and he realized that she was right, that his debt was paid in full. And he finally started accepting pain medications from the nurses, and his pain was greatly reduced. And his wife came back in to see him, and they ended up sharing a couple of meals together and some laughs, and they talked about their lives and the things that they had been through together. It was a beautiful thing to see them reconnect and to have that time to share together. The next patient I want to tell you about is a patient named Tim. This is one of my favorite hospice stories, by the way, so I love this story. So Tim came in, and he was a cancer patient, and he was fairly young, and he came in with his mom, and he was curled up on the bed, and his mom said, that he had been like this for a couple of days and that he hadn't been eating, and that this was, he was just lying there and saying that he was in pain, and the pain medications that they were giving him hadn't been extremely effective. So I called up a local doctor that I know who was actually happened to be following his plan of care, and this amazing hospice and palliative doctor. And I called him up and I said, I need to run my math by you here, because this seems like a lot of medication to give this patient, and it doesn't seem like it's helping. And he didn't bat an eyelash. He said, yes, this is correct. Let's do this for this patient. So the decision was to get him a morphine pump. And so before, we do anything, we always involve the patient and the family in the plan of care. So I went to his mom and I said, I think that this is a result of a lot of pain. And so the doctor and I have talked, and we think that the best thing for him would be a morphine pump. And his mom started crying so hard. And she's like, I know what that means. I know what that means when they start the morphine pump. I just know what that means. And she was just crying, and I was trying to tell her, we're not going to give him more medicine. We're going to start out low and slow and see how it goes. And she wasn't convinced. She knew that once we started this morphine pump, that was going to be it for her son. And so she agreed to it, and we did start the pump. And the next morning, she comes in to see her son, and he's sitting up in the bed with a volunteer with him, and he's eating some breakfast. And she couldn't believe it. She was beside herself. She was shocked. So this is the greatest part of the story. The patient, he tells us that he thought in the last couple of days that he wasn't going to be able to fulfill something that he wanted to fulfill. His brother had been asking him to go out on a boat and go fishing with him for the last couple of years, but that he had been busy, or he hadn't found the time, and he hadn't gone with him. And so he said, I would like to go. He was telling one of our nurses, he said, I would like to go out on a boat and go fishing with my brother. And the patient kept improving over the next couple of days, feeling much better. Then he was starting to get up and move about, and his pain was a lot less. And so he was telling the nurse, I want to go, out on a boat with my brother. And she was a fairly new hospice nurse at the time. Now she's 12 years later, so she would know now, but she came up to me. I was the clinical director at the time. She said, the patient says that he wants to go out on a boat fishing with his brother. And I said, okay. And she said, what? I said, okay, let's make it happen. Let's do it. And she said, he can do that? And I said, of course he can. You know, we're here to help him live his life. And so the patient ended up going out on that boat with his brother several times. He always joked about how he had caught the biggest fish, and his brother said maybe it wasn't true, but we went with believing him. So, you know, these are the kind of stories that happen in hospice. And yes, the story ends at the end of hospice with a person dying. But did you notice in the stories that we were just talking about that we weren't talking about dying? We were talking about a patient's life. They were living. They were living, and they just needed a little bit of help along the way to get to where they could enjoy whatever was left of their lives. And they did get a little bit more of that life. And that joy that my grandmother taught me to love, I found it again when I started taking care of hospice patients. It's the time and, you know, the care model. Hospice is a collaborative care model that works. So basically, you have a whole team of people who are a safety net to surround you and take care of you and make sure that all the things are heard and all the things are addressed. And so you have nurses and CNAs and a social worker, a spiritual counselor, a bereavement counselor, the medical director, volunteers that are just always ready to come and do whatever they can to help and to support. And the wonderful thing about it is when the Medicare hospice benefit came about, they put into place a lot of guidelines on how hospices should behave or have to behave to be included in the benefit. And that is, you know, the whole team has to meet at least every 14 days. At the Fisher Home, we meet every 7 days, but the conditions of participation are that you have to meet every 14 days and discuss the care of your patient. And we're not just talking about discussing their medications and where they are in their disease process. We're discussing with our psychosocial team their happiness, and if they're feeling that is there any way that we can make their lives better for them? Is there any way that we can improve upon their lives at that particular time? We know that you need your dexamethasone at 2 o'clock, but we also know that your uncle, who you haven't seen in 2 years because you're estranged, is supposed to be flying in next Tuesday on a plane and you're nervous. We have to know all of the things. And that's the beautiful thing about hospice is that we do. The other beautiful thing about hospice is that anything related to your hospice diagnosis is covered by Medicare or insurance. So people who are in need of hospital beds or if they're in need of a walker or a wheelchair or raised toilet seat or any of the things that they might need and any medication related to their hospice diagnosis, all of these things are covered for them. So they don't have to worry about that if they're in their own home or if they're in a skilled nursing facility, if they're in assisted living, if they're anywhere, they can just depend on this insurance benefit to help them, which, you know, to me, it's something that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services got right. I think that it's one of the most holistic ways to care for a patient and their family. And over the years, I've just seen it work so well over and over again. And the peace and joy that it brings to patients. I have another story I wasn't planning on telling, but we had a young boy on hospice and he, I think he was 19. So to me, a young boy on hospice. And he was saying that his wish was that he wished he got to see the latest Star Wars movie before the movie came out, before he was to die. And he knew that he was fairly close to dying. And a frivolous wish of a 19-year-old, and it was something that we thought, well, can we make this happen? So we got in touch with the powers that be, and the movie wasn't even out yet. And the folks from the who created the movie, or that were in charge of the rights, came and set up a huge screen in his room and let him have the first screening of the movie. And just his whole family came and they watched it together and ate popcorn, and just seeing that the hospice team can pull something together like that for a family. It seems like a little thing, but it's not. It's a huge thing. So these are the kind of things that that make hospice so special to me. And that's why, you read my bio and it's like, my passion is hospice. It is because you're provided with the opportunity when you can work together as a team to be able to bring joy to people and to their families, even if you can't make a situation different. The end result we can't change, but we can change how the rest of your life could play out. And I think that's my takeaway, is that's what I believe to be the foundation of what hospice is. I have some questions that are frequently asked, but I think maybe what would be best is if people wanted to ask questions, and then I could fill in blanks if nobody asked them.
Okay, let me jump in here. I think I'm unmuted and your timing was perfect, so that's great. One question before I get to the chat questions is, what's the difference between palliative care and hospice?
That is a great question. Thank you for reminding me. So the difference between, okay, how can I say it in a way that would make it really confusing? So all hospice is palliative. So palliative is about, managing symptoms for people and making them comfortable. But palliative care isn't necessarily hospice. Hospice is an insurance benefit that you're signing on to, saying, I don't want any more treatment. I don't want to be going back and forth to the hospital. I don't want any of those things. I just want to focus the rest of my life on living the rest of my life. And hospice is there to manage symptoms with you or to solve problems with you. Palliative care, you can actually get from the second that you're told that you have a life-limiting illness. So you go to your doctor and they tell you some bad news. Right then and there, you can say, I want palliative care. I want a palliative care consult. That's usually a team that's at a hospital, but sometimes they're associated with hospices. But they will do the same kinds of things that hospice does for you. They'll help, help you plan your appointments and get things squared away. They can help you with your symptom management. But with palliative care, you still have the ability to get chemotherapy or go to the hospital if you feel like you want IV hydration. So it's sort of both hospice and palliative care provide comfort care, but with palliative care, you still have the ability to do curative treatment.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to sort of interrupt myself in the questions because I didn't do my in between your talk and the Q&A. So I just want to jump in to say that I will be reading the questions from chat and let Maria answer them. But let me give you the future. And that is on February 3rd, Bob Leverett is coming to the Northampton Neighbor Speakers, talking about discovery of old growth trees. Then on March 3rd, Barbara Blumenthal, a historian, and Ellie Maripol, an author, are coming to talk about some truths about Northampton Hospital through fact and fiction. So sorry for that interruption. I'm messing up on my cues. So back to the questions. So Maria, how do you decide if someone needs hospice in your residential program versus at their home?
So we never decide for a patient where they are going to receive care. So we talk to the patient and their family members and talk about the help that they have at home and whether the person feels comfortable being at their own house. Many times our patients stay in their own homes and they die in their own homes and they never want or need to come into the residence. So sometimes a person might be having an unmanaged symptom that sort of makes them feel like they can't manage it at home for a short amount of time. And in that way, we sometimes bring them to the residence with permission of the patient and family. We sort of have 24 hours hospice experts helping them, and then we return them to wherever they lived once they return to baseline. So, but it's really the decision of the patient and the family. Sometimes they have goals and they say, I want to stay at home no matter what. I want to try to stay at home. And sometimes they say, when I can't blank anymore, I want to come to the Fisher home, whether it be when I can't walk anymore, or when I can't get out of bed, or when I can't use the bathroom by myself. So we talk about all those goals in the beginning and figure out, and it's a moving target because goals are always shifting and changing. But we try to talk about that in the beginning.
And usually you have to have a terminal diagnosis that it's likely that you'll die within 6 months. What happens if someone hasn't died in 6 months and they're at the hospice?
That's a great question. People often worry about that, and they ask me that very frequently. Well, what happens if I don't die in 6 months? Well, that's okay. We'll be happy for you. And also, you can stay on hospice for unlimited amounts of time as long as the trajectory of your illness is showing decline. So basically, if you're slowly losing abilities and you're kind of going up and down a little bit, it's okay. After the first 6 months, then the medical director from the hospice will just check in on you every 30 days to make sure that you're still doing okay and that you're still eligible for hospice. Disclaimer, we have had some people graduate from hospice. So sometimes people just get to a certain point and they're steady for a long time, and so that can be difficult for people as well. But no one will kick you off hospice if you live longer than 6 months.
And how many patients can you have at your hospice program at a time?
Well, so in the actual all of our programs, usually in the house, we can only have 9 at a time. So, that's a limited ability to take patients into the house. In the community, it really fluctuates. We've had as high as 40 to 50 patients. We've had as low as 8 patients. It's really the nature of hospice. But what we do is accept patients when we know that we have the ability to take good care of them. So I guess we would max out our community program when we felt that we wouldn't be able to provide Fisher home care to them.
Okay. And this person thanks you for sharing. And do you have anything to say about hospice for people with cognitive problems or dementia?
That's a good question too. So yeah, I do. I think it's really important for all healthcare providers to stay up on their in servicing and on their learning about taking care of patients with cognitive problems and dementia. We definitely do it every year here at the Fisher Home, and there are new things that come out to help us cope. It's tricky to take care of people who may not understand what you're doing to them or where they are, or they don't remember you from the next time that they see you. So it's about a very gentle, calm approach and about making sure that you still let that person be in control as much as possible.
Okay. And how do you qualify for hospice care? Is it all based on a medical diagnosis, and which kind of diagnoses qualify?
So First of all, anybody can refer anyone to hospice. So you can refer yourself to hospice, you can refer a friend to hospice. You don't need a physician to refer to hospice. So typically what you see is that maybe there's been frequent rehospitalizations with a person, or you've been noticing that they've been eating a lot less and maybe sleeping a lot more, that the person is saying to you that they don't want to keep going back to the doctor's office, or maybe you're feeling yourself that you don't want to be going back to the hospital or the doctor. And so you start to see those kind of signs. You think, okay, maybe this person or myself may be eligible for hospice. So you would just call your hospice. All hospices have someone there to answer the phone and talk you through the process. And so basically you would call hospice and say, tell your story. And typically what would happen is a hospice nurse would come to you if you were open to that and assess the situation. And we would also go through paperwork from your primary doctors or any hospitalizations, and we would see if you were likely hospice eligible. Any life-limiting illness that your doctor or our medical director feels that the likelihood of you still being with us 6 months from now is that it's not very likely, that would make a person eligible for hospice.
Okay. And with the growing senior population, are there any other hospice residential programs in Western Mass? And if there aren't, is there a long wait list for services?
So, no, there's not any other residential hospice in Western Massachusetts. It's something that, we're very proud of being a part of the community. I think that the people that end up at the hospice of the Fisher home and not in their own homes or where they live, most of the time it's because they really need a hospice residence. They need 24-hour care from people who know how to take care of hospice patients. So having a hospice residence in our community is really, really important. As far as the wait list is concerned, so you would think that there would be a long wait list. Sometimes we do have a wait list. Every now and then it'll happen, but typically due to the nature of hospice, there's usually not a wait list. So typically when people are trying to get here, they can get here.
How are people referred? Is it the primary care doc, a specialist, the family, the individual, or all of the above?
Yes, that's right. All of the above. Anyone can refer to hospice, and anyone can call hospice. And also not just the Fisher home, but all hospices. We just care about humans. So if you think that you just have questions that you're not sure if your loved one is even close to eligible for hospice, don't worry. We're here to help you. So you can always call us and we'll talk to you about it. And if we think, oh yeah, hospice probably isn't the right choice for you right now, we're not going to say, well, so see you later. We're going to try to help you find the services that you need so that you and your loved one can be well taken care of and safe. So it's a shelter in the storm. When in doubt, you can call a hospice.
And between the outpatient hospice or the at-home hospice and the residential, what's the average age of hospice patients? Do you know that?
Ooh, I don't know that offhand. I don't want to speak out of turn. I'm not sure about that. It's a good question.
Okay.
Yeah.
And does hospice in the home or in the residence, what kind of help can they give family members, or is it all focused on the patient?
No, it's not all focused on the patient. That's the wonderful thing about hospice. No, we focus on the entire family and all the people that are involved that are the loved ones of the patient and the patient themselves. So the psychosocial team, which consists of a spiritual counselor, a bereavement counselor, a social worker, all of those people also support any family members that are involved or any loved ones that are involved. You know, we were just talking about this a little bit earlier, but you know, it's very much like the beginning of life. You know, you don't just take care of the mom when she's giving birth, the whole group is involved. And the care goes to everyone. And that's what hospice does, is kind of holds the whole family or all the loved ones and the patient in a safety net. So we support everyone.
Very good. And what towns do you accept patients from? Is there an area that you're limited to, or is it statewide, or is it?
No, we have patients all along the tri-county border, so in Hampden, Hampshire, and Hampden counties.
Okay. And do you support people who are in the process of voluntarily stopping eating or drinking?
So actually, people can go along their path and make any decision that they want throughout their lives, and including in their death. And, you know, we don't help people to steer towards that decision or away from that decision. But if that decision did arise for a person, we just support people in what their decision is.
There was a recent article in the New Yorker you may have seen on for-profit hospice programs and how they probably had been fraudulent with Medicare, and how they really try to get numbers of patients even if they don't quite really need hospice. Mm-hmm. And my understanding from that article is 75% of all hospice programs are for-profit now. Is Fisher Home a for-profit or a nonprofit? Is a two-part question.
That's fine.
Nonprofit or for-profit? And how does one, do you have any advice for people of trying to figure out if you have an ethical hospice program you're talking to, or if it's one that might be fraudulent?
I sure do. So to answer the first part of the question, the Hospice of the Fisher Home is a nonprofit hospice. And we're not affiliated with any hospital system. So we're a freestanding hospice. And I do have advice, because the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they saw that these things were happening. And it's so sad that would happen, because it takes a special kind of person to take advantage of people when they're at a vulnerable time in their lives. But I'm not going to go off on that tangent. But so what the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services did was they came up with core measures that each hospice has to report on to send for each individual patient. So there are 7 core measures that are anchored to admission, 3 core measures that are anchored to discharge. And within 30 days of admission or discharge, every hospice has to report these measures on every single patient. So, you know, although the article is stating that, you know, there's all these hospices flying under the radar doing all these evil things, the fact is that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services are watching, and they made these rules so to safeguard against just that. So if you are looking to check out a hospice and whether they are an ethical hospice or not, you can go to it's called Care Compare. It's a Mass.gov website, and it will show you the hospice and where they stand on each of these 7 core measures. And these are the measures that show how many times and how well you take care of your patients and respond to their needs. So that's a really great place to go and compare and see, you know, because hospices who may be operating on a dishonest level will have lower marks. The other thing that this Care Compare website does is it shows you how family members have rated that hospice after the discharge of their loved one. So you can see comments that say, oh, you know, I didn't see a hospice nurse in 2 weeks before my father passed away. Or you can see comments that say, like on the Hospice of the Fisher Home, that say, oh, you know, it would recommend this hospice 100%. They were great. You know, they were responsive to my pain. They were responsive to my emotional needs. You know, how often a social worker came, you can see all of the things. So I would highly recommend that Care Compare website.
Care Compare. Okay. Someone, Kim, is saying end of life options legislation, and she's just putting in a plug, is being talked about again in the legislature by Joe Comerford, and hopefully will pass, and hopefully we'll have all of us support it. So that's just an opinion or a recommendation. Another person, and I saw Kim's name, but I haven't seen everybody's name. I apologize. And I can't see this person's name, but someone noticed that all your stories, wonderful as they are, were about men. Do you have any good stories or one story about a woman?
Well, look at you. I should have expected. I should have been more careful. Yes, I have tons of stories about people, about women in hospice. I guess I just didn't differentiate one or the other. I could tell you one right now if you have time. So I have one lady who is here. I'll make it short. But she came for symptom management and she really wanted to be at home. So we got her symptoms managed here. And this is going to sound crazy to some of you guys, but it's normal in hospice. So she went home and she had been there for a little bit, and the nurses were visiting, and they decided that things were getting a little out of control. She was starting to be forgetful and maybe a little bit agitated, and wasn't really able to be by herself. And so we decided that we would try to see if she would want to come back to, well, first we tried to see whether there was anyone who could help take care of her at home. She had a big friend group, but everyone was working and they didn't have a lot of time. So the nurse had asked her, well, just come back to the Fisher room for a little bit until we can make a plan. And Nancy wasn't having it. She, you know, was giving the nurse a hard time. So myself and the social worker decided, let's go over there and see what's going on with Nancy. So we get there and she's absolutely not wanting to leave the house at all. She recognizes me because we were pretty good friends, you know, throughout, we had made a friendship. And all of a sudden she just starts doing really bizarre things, and she starts riding her broom around the house like it was a horse. So being me and the social worker, we decide that the way to lead her outside into our car and have her come with us is to also jump on other objects that were in the house and ride them around alongside of her. So here we are, a social worker, a nurse, and a hospice patient, galloping around her apartment on these, you know, mops and brooms. And, you know, she looked at me and I could tell for a second, she knew, like, she knew what that we were all acting absolutely crazy. But then she put her broom down and it was about trust. She was like, you know what, if you're the kind of people that will get on a broomstick and gallop around my apartment with me to make me know that you're not here to harm me, then, you know what, I guess I'll go with you. And she did. And we stopped for an ice cream on the way home. We stopped for an ice cream on the way back to the Fisher home.
That is a good story.
Story.
For home care, home hospice care, are there levels of care, and how are the levels decided?
Yeah, so there are 4 levels of hospice care that anybody is eligible for, no matter where they live. So the most commonly used level of care is routine hospice care. So you're getting regular visits from the team, your symptoms are managed, everything's going fairly well. That's one level of care. There's respite care, where it's usually used for caregiver breakdown, and typically it's provided in a facility, and it's up to 5 days, and basically it's not a charge to the patient or family. It's so that the family can rest or manage. It's very hard work being a caregiver. So that's another level of care. There's continuous care, where sometimes a person is at home or wherever they live, and they're having a hard time with a symptom that needs to be managed. And so the nurse will stay with them for a long period of time. And sometimes an aide will stay with them for a long period of time. So typically the rule is greater than 8 hours, in a 24-hour period, consecutive 8 hours, that a nurse or a CNA is present. I think maybe a social worker, but 51% of that care has to be provided by the RN or by the nurse. So basically you need to have over 4 hours in a day that you need a nurse to stay with you to help manage your symptoms. So that's continuous care. And then there's general inpatient care. And general inpatient care is utilized for a patient whose symptoms are out of control and they cannot be managed at home. And so that's usually provided either in the hospital or in a skilled nursing facility. And that's the goal of general inpatient care, is to return the patient to baseline and get them back to where they belong and where they're safe. But that person just needs a very high level of care to make that happen. So really, most hospice is routine hospice care, taking care of the patient in their own environment. The other 3 levels are really when there's a problem, and the goal of those other levels of care is to return the patient to routine home care.
And does your program work with end-of-life doulas?
We do work with end-of-life doulas, and this is new to me over the last few years. And we actually have an end-of-life doula on our board of directors. But we have had end-of-life doulas that are here taking care of patients. And I have to say, it's a whole different level of, this person is just dedicated to this one person, and they're just have this understanding of them, and they're with them. End-of-life doulas work really well with hospice. So we're always happy when someone has an end-of-life doula.
Good. So your hospice works with the entire family. Is there a team in palliative care as well that work with the entire family?
Yes, there is. So there is an interdisciplinary team in palliative care, just like there is in hospice. And they do try to support the patient and the family with psychosocial needs and anything else that might come up.
Okay. Do you take care of elderly who may be in a nursing home, who know that their time is short, even if death isn't imminent?
We
Do they
do.
have to meet the same criteria?
Well, everyone has to meet the criteria that, with the current trajectory of your illness, it's quite likely that you may pass away within 6 months. So that's basically the criteria every person has to meet. But yes, we take care of a lot of people in skilled nursing facilities and all kinds of care settings. And the wonderful thing about taking care of people who are in nursing facilities is oftentimes they do have a little more time with us, and they get the extra attention. They have their own CNA that comes during the day and comes for an hour or two and do the special things that they might not have time to do at the nursing home, and they have a nurse that comes and sees them. So it's really, we find that extra support for those folks who are in facilities is even more of a hopeful thing.
Does the Fisher home, is it paid for completely by Medicare, or do you ever have private pay? And if so, what's the cost of that?
So Hospice Anywhere, we all charge Medicare for the hospice benefit when you live in your own home in an independent living, anywhere like that. So that's no charge to the patient. When you come to the hospice residence in Amherst, there is a room and board fee associated with coming to the Fisher home. Basically because you have expert hospice staff with you 24 hours a day instead of coming to visit at your house. So that's $475 a day. Typically it's privately paid, but some insurances, long-term care insurances, will cover the room and board fee.
Okay. Do you accept undocumented folks?
We definitely have, yes. And I think it's really important. Now, we don't bill for those individuals, but I think every person is, and we at the Fisher Home believe that every person is deserving of the same kind of end-of-life care, whether they're documented or undocumented. And so we provide the same loving service to any patient that we have.
Do you ever give it for free or have a sliding scale for those kinds of folks?
So undocumented people, yes, we have provided free care for them. And as far as sliding scale, we try our very best. We do budget at the Fisher Home. Every quarter we budget a certain amount of money for subsidized care. So we try to have, finances not be a reason why you can't receive care in your choice of where you want to spend your end of life.
We are getting toward the end. Another question is, how does the Fisher Home help their staff take care of themselves mentally, physically, emotionally?
Yeah, so we meet a lot. We have the psychosocial team that holds also meetings for staff without management so that they can express feelings about how they may be feeling about things that are happening at the Fisher Home, without feeling like they may say something out of turn. The psychosocial team doors are always open to any staff member that, it is hard work and it's taxing. And we know that we're not their family members, but, we do grow to love them. And so, yeah, our staff needs help to be able to keep on doing this work year after year. And so we try to offer that support of, having groups that they can be a part of, and also just keeping constant communication open with them at monthly meetings.
And I think I read through this question. I think you've already answered it, so I won't give you that. How many patients can you welcome at the, oh no, we answered that one too. Let me just catch up because we're almost out of time. You answered that one. And the cost of Fisher Home, you answered. You answered how the family supported. Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
Questions. I think we may have answered all the questions.
Well, there were a lot of very, very good questions. So I'm glad I didn't get stumped. I'll tell you something. The reason why I start telling, and I don't want to take up time, but the reason why I start telling the history of the hospice in the beginning is because my board member, Dina, and I were at the Sunderland's Women's Club, a Zoom just like this. And, we thought we were doing a good job answering the questions and knowing the things. And then one of them asked us, oh, can you just tell us a little bit about how hospice started and how it came to the area? And we both froze and we were like, and then it was an important and valuable lesson, so I'm glad I didn't get stumped this time.
Very good. And another person just put a chat thing in saying she's so impressed. She or he is so impressed. We aren't able to clap. We found that that's difficult on Zoom, but thank you so much. It was a wonderful talk. And I think you answered all of our questions very well.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much for coming out and listening to this talk about hospice.
Okay. And with that, goodbye, everybody. Nina, you can put up our screensaver if you would, because should you want to, you can donate to Northampton Neighbors. We always appreciate it, but we still don't request any charge for any of our services. Maria, thank you very much. Audience, thank you very much. Great questions, good discussion.
Happy to be here. Thank you.